This sort of activity has always looked at man as a tadpole, awaiting further development, while religion, psychology, and conventional thinking see him already as a frog, and a frog in need of treatment. Blind acceptance of this attitude makes change in one's life impossible, to say the least. At any given instant, men are either conscious of their thoughts, their physical feelings, or their emotional ones, but never simply conscious of consciousness. More specifically, they never think about the process of thinking, nor ponder the nature of feelings. They just have them and are vaguely aware that they do. There was once a boy who had a weasel, which would go places and get into things that would cause the boy trouble. But that wasn't the all of it. Not only did it get into situations that did the boy no good, but the situation was made worse by the fact that someone kept writing down all of the weasel's misdeeds on a slate and holding it up continually in front of his face. The illiterate jazz musicians went up from New Orleans to Chicago to achieve their fame, where they learned to read and write music. But somewhere between the two places, somewhere around Memphis, they lost part of their original inspiration and took up playing the blues. Do note that while all of this appeared to occur sequentially, it yet still all exists simultaneously. Those who have at one time been a bit more alert can see in the body, can be in the body and be aggressive, and can be in thoughts and be angry, but it becomes increasingly unlikely to be in emotions and be so unproductive. There was once a town in which, if you lived, you were worse off. That is, you were worse off than usual if you weren't aware you were there. But curious thing was that if you were aware that you were there, being there could be of great benefit. A man who had delved deeply into history's transcendental writings so mused. Quite often do the writers refer to man as being asleep, but what specifically do they point to? Obviously not the body, so is it him being asleep in the mind, which at first seems most likely? Or could they be speaking of him being asleep in his emotions? The man was surprised to have thought of this last possibility, and for a while it furnished him with much fresh energy. As long as you think you're in charge, life still totally is. Not unlike how, if you believe that you're naturally conscious, you're not. Whoopee, what a life, muttered a passing chap. One of the subtle challenges of wrestling with emotions is that to ever get an initial hold on them, you must first think about them. And once you think about them, it is then oh so easy to confuse them with thinking about them. A quick test is that if you're just thinking about emotions, you don't get any energy from it. All forms of life which survive do so on the basis of habit. And while this is also true regarding the mental life of man, such an arrangement is a locked-in situation providing no room whatsoever for change and growth. A man attempting to modify his own consciousness is not unlike a sheep trying to grow its own grass. Sounds tricky. It is tricky. Things do not happen in life such as wars, reformations, the appearance of heroes and villains, and other social upheavals that cause life to change. Life causes life to change. In one sense, the body seems easy to positively affect, such as the building of muscles or an increase in stamina. yet difficult to change when it is being negatively impacted, illness. Then we have the mind, which strikes man as being truly pliable and capable of being molded easily into ways either beneficial or otherwise. Lastly are the emotions which, though often confused with other functions, appear to give man singular possibilities of grief, but which also seem to serve as his primary outlet for expressions of joy. Consider all just noted in conjunction with the matter of useful efforts versus meaningless ones, and a bit deeper, how, in instances of polarized operations, movement in one direction always seems more possible than in the other. While you cannot go from being physically dead to being physically undead, you can, in higher areas of the nervous system, move from a place of natural disturbance and discomfort to one, though known, that at the instant moment seems out of reach. There simply is no such thing as a better state of consciousness unless there is the possibility of an individual man internally bridging the normal gaps that appear to substantially separate the sequence of emotions in life, the sadness of yesterday from the recovery of today. Life can wear you out simply from wearing you out. If you continue to passively wear the experiences it daily passes out. Kids and adults alike draw pictures and both color them, but neither ever studies the relationship between their drawings and the colors they apply to them. And as always, of course, there is no need for them to do so, for with kids and adults alike, life pre-chews all their food, which can leave you with yet another picture of where the few stand. His lifelong perusal of the written notes that remain regarding that special struggle to achieve another state of consciousness led one man to this. Many of those previously involved in such activity spoke of the mechanicalness of man and how this must be overcome. But did they mean something other than the mechanicalness of the body and his natural functions? Most surely not. Did they mean something other than the mechanicalness of the body and its natural functions? Most surely. So were they referring to the mechanicalness of his thought processes? It indeed seems applicable. But were they also speaking of more, of his emotions, which are so intertwined with the body directly and the mind indirectly as to make them near impossible to approach as a separate entity? Having presented himself with such a question proved to be of assistance in all areas of his own study of man and his potential. Inside the human clock and calendar, things are gone a long time ago over a gradual period of time. None can experience time in such a manner who cannot think about what has happened to them in the past and how it might affect their future. Furthermore, none but those with the ability to think about it want to have such an experience, and none but those with the ability can suffer from it. All in all, the human memory, particularly as regards strictly human affairs, seems entirely too slippery and unpredictable to be unconditionally called a friend. Assuming that you eventually come to the conclusion that producing your own new energy to pursue your own new interest is problematic in the polite world, impossible in the blunt one, you're finally faced with the fact that all you have to draw on is a redirecting of that energy already available, and particularly of that which is inherent in emotions, especially those of an unpleasant nature. May still sound tricky, but is not actually as tricky as it sounds. All that's required is that you have an extraordinary aim to change. You rewrite the energy in negative emotions at least once so that you know it is possible. Then all that remains is that you remember to do it whenever they come calling. Those who've tasted real freedom, that is, liberation from the ordinary, discovered that one good emotional blast is worth a billion words and thoughts. The rearing of man. The body raises everyone up to a certain point. Then the mind appears to take over, which concludes the maturing of ordinary men. And yet, they always feel as though something was missed. It is meaningless to study and think about another state of consciousness if achieving it is not your goal. It is also useless to study yourself and your own life without such an aim. In lieu of the effort to explore their emotions and bring them under any control, men extend to one another their sympathy. And while it always seems directed at some grief-causing incident in someone else's life, could it not also be unknowingly aimed at the fact that men do grieve, and do so as a reflex act which they never examine or question? From one special view, this situation is the one deserving of sympathy, if any is. Men have a mental imagination line, not unlike the timberline in the physical world, above which on mountains trees will not grow. But in the case of man, it is like a line in his consciousness above which imagination cannot exist. This area above the line is the seat of individual consciousness. In the areas of politics, religion, and all of the arts, young men continually appear who stage rebellions against the older established order, and not, as routinely claimed, because of doctrinal differences with it, but rather at its loss of passion. Do you not sense a similar necessity in your own desire for a personal revolution? After extensive study of the world's mystical records, one man so pondered, much has been written about enlightenment being a release from suffering, with suffering always surrounded by extraordinary cosmic insinuations. But what might this be a reflection of, whether the writers realize it or not, other than a desire not to experience those very feelings so common to man? This question led the man from his high mountain path temporarily onto a side one that he had not seen before. As regards the matter of useful and meaningless efforts, the efforts a man will ordinarily make are those which benefit life. But if your desire is for true individuality, such efforts may be totally meaningless. Things which are necessary and best for a herd may be of no significance to individual cows. And furthermore, if a cow has somehow been able to come up with its own personal aim, such things can then in fact be a hindrance. There is no intellectual theory to support this, only the passion and desire that it be so. For any chance of success, a man must relentlessly explore, and not the same areas over and over again, which has potential danger beyond redundancy. It's obvious that you can wear out the body, and apparently so the mind. But look what that leaves to work with. If you do not, by unexamined repetition, wear them also down to the level of hollow echoes. Life calls to everyone for them not to get off schedule, a call almost impossible to ignore. That which is almost impossible is tricky. That which is actually impossible doesn't exist. To put some of history and our own current comments into a simple perspective, all statements that man is asleep or hypnotized or living in an unnecessarily limited state of consciousness are merely other ways of saying that an ordinary man lives exactly how life, in his case, directs. One of the specific allowances permitted those who think that they're interested in the possibility of extraordinary work on themselves is that you can think about it as long as you live, as long as you like, but as long as you live, in fact. Just what is extraordinary work on oneself, you might ask? Very well. It is the making of efforts, the benefits of which cannot be realized by anyone but you. The periodic table of man. You can stare at your stomach, you can stare at your brain, but the staring between can be worst of all. If you believe that life, for some specific reason, has made you like you are, you'll never be able to move internally from the position in which you seem to find yourself. Some of what men think of as personal flaws are in truth minor aspects of life's grid work of self-protection. Consider this. Men do not experience mental problems that produce the unpleasant facts as do those of the body and emotions. That is, mental problems offer challenges which are not unpleasant, and thus problems, in the sense that via ills and heartaches, physical and emotional ones are. In every instance of two major kingdoms in close proximity, they will be separated by, yet connected by, a less distinct one between them. Ordinary men's belief that they have individual consciousness is an illusion, but one which they have been allowed to hold only because it is possible. The unwritten menu. If you think there's little you can say about the body, and even less about the mind, just consider emotions and see what you can come up with. Life conceals many things under its skirt from man, and most of all, its reproductive operations, which are not, by the way, limited to things physical. The alien space an alert man needs to explore is not off this planet, but in his own nervous system. Heartbreak, as regards the few, does not exist in time. It can only be right now, as in missing a present opportunity to struggle with natural passion. And a man once asked a mystic, can you be in some kind of better state of awareness and still feel bad? Not physically, I mean, like being sick, but feel bad, like emotionally feel bad. And the one receiving the question was quite impressed that someone would ask such. To produce the extraordinary additional energy a man needs for that extraordinary journey, it's hard for him to put his own self on the spot. But if you look around good, life's doing it for you constantly. Another tip for those in a hurry. A man's natural emotional reactions are generally not helpful for one seeking change and an expansion of understanding. And still another man steps forward to say that the most insightful words he ever heard from a human came from his father also. When the old man looked out over life and observed everything is in a state of flux. The mind's unofficial attitude toward emotions is, if they ever get right, bronze them. No metaphors, allegories, or teachings are needed when a man can look at the experiences of his own life objectively, particularly to see those times of greatest passion impassionately. Musically speaking, the reason that you've never heard of a mystical blues is because those who know take those experiences that could inspire such and turn them into joyful hymns and play songs. To try and satisfy that certain hunger, it has been said that a man must die before he dies. But more specifically put would be to say that a man must get smart before, during, and in spite of his physical aging and increasing loss of passion for life, wherein the suggestion comes to him that he has somehow, as a matter of course, become wise. When life ceases active growth in a certain area, it will offer compensation. A real man does not want compensation. He wants the infinite excitement possible in a never-ending struggle to change. Consider simply what this sort of activity is about. Historically being known by, we can list 3 or 4 names that about covers all of the temporal and geographical areas of the history of man. It's been called that the activity is for the purpose of enlightenment, or that the goal is for the awakening of consciousness, or the liberation of the mind, and a little more flamboyant approach, the struggle for reunion with the Godhead, or reunion with the source of creation, or even a new union with it. There's no need for us to add to it any more than there's any need to latch onto one and think that that is a definitive statement, because they're all about the same thing. Another plain reality, or someday it will be, we'll assume, but a plain reality about the situation is that within everything that is publicly known and written about this sort of activity, you should note, or I'll do it for you, that it is divided really into 2 parts. One is the experience itself, the enlightenment, the awakening, the liberation, the reunion. It is safe for me to say that for all intents and purposes, no one lives in that state. If you become the exception, fine. It would be my pleasure for you to come back and bring me up to date. I point this out for a reason, because it's not to distract from anyone's heroes or history's perception of past spiritual heroes. But the idea of someone reaching a state of enlightenment, and it is a once and for all permanent shift in consciousness. It is not verbally so. Now I'll leave it at that. The other part of, when I say it's actually 2 parts to this activity, one is the experience, which seems to be the aim of it. Let's just assume you can pick out any of the ones you liked that I mentioned. But that is the aim of it, is to have the experience, the enlightenment, the awakening. The other part of it, since I am not disingenuously telling you that is not a matter of achieving it and, well, now I'm here and that's that. So if I am being genuine with you in this, and the other part of it is the effort, the struggle, assuming that we're speaking of someone as much as possible, sincerely, personally involved with such as this, or interested to the point that they, at least for a period of time, believe, they think they are, that they make certain physical efforts like attending meetings somewhere, reading books, doing something that to them displays, evidences their true interest. then that is the activity. And more specifically, within the activity, we can list 3 or 4 general sorts of activities that will, again, about cover the full spectrum of history. It has been called the attempt to remember the face of God. It has been called this is the kind of struggle. It has been called the struggle to calm the mind. It has been called the effort to clear consciousness. It has been called the challenge of never forgetting one's aim. And even just verbally, with a cursory listen, I assume you see that it's obvious that they have a great deal in common, that they even seem to overlap. Again, there's no need for us to add to it any of those, and anything in between those will suffice. And it should be clear that they're all pointing to some sort of stabilization or some sort of, some sort of stabilization of one's inner processes beyond the physical level, beyond childish ideas of beginning to affect your heartbeat, and which are simply meaningless tricks. And so I assume that you are understanding that this kind of new stabilization is something other than strictly physical. And the easiest to point to is in the area of thought. It's why historically so many of the descriptions of this activity and the descriptions of their methods point directly to mental processes, the liberation of the mind, the awakening of consciousness, the enlightenment, which is generally just left out the enlightenment, but if you think the enlightenment of what? The enlightenment of my body? I mean, it could be a little something there, but I mean, it doesn't really tell you much. So all of them, in some way, are pointing toward mental processes, the descriptions of the activity generally. Then the methods themselves, if you will note, are still along similar reference points. The attempt to remember the face of God or the name of God, if you do not get entangled with the apparent supernatural reference of God, pick out the first part of the description, the attempt to continually remember. And you know without any analyzation that the memory spoken of is not physical memory. It's not your body remembering how to ride a bicycle. It is the mind. It's that sort of memory, the kind of memory that is singular to man, or the attempt to calm the mind, the attempt to clear consciousness. All those descriptions point directly or indirectly. When they point indirectly, it's like you're left with no other choice. It's just a matter of elimination. But the majority of them point directly to some sort of mental activity, even though it may be referred to as consciousness. But I was going to say that the general descriptions, they may sound as though even they are divided into 2 major counts, but you should be able to see that there is a great similarity there. To wit, several of the descriptions seem to point to a stabilization in the thought processes, which it would take for a person to continually remember the face of God or the name of Allah, for a man to, or the one to continually count each breath one takes. All of that, don't get distracted with the idea of breath, with the word breath thrown in, counting the breath, or remembering the face of God. It's the first part of the sentence. That's where the method is. That is where the heart is the attempt to always remember, the attempt to count each breath, which just, they leave out the word to remember to count each breath, because to count each breath is no challenge. That's no problem. You ask somebody, could you count every breath you take? And everybody'd say yes. And you could say, can you remember to do it? And if they had any ability to see straight, they would try it a few times and go, no. So it appears that some of the methods are involved with a kind of stabilization, that is, bringing your thought processes under some sort of control, being able to focus. in a very crude sense, most people who think of the idea of meditation, it's along these lines, that you could focus your mind in some way and bring it right to a point to where it had the same kind of tensile strength as a good pumped up bicep does from 10 or 15 good reps of arm curls. That seems to be a very strong, under control muscle. The other one or two generally are most common descriptions, such as clearing consciousness. It may sound as though clearing and controlling or focusing might be two different things, but I was just going to point out to you that they're not, and I'm going to leave it at that. That any of you with any insight must be able to see if they do not appear immediately similar or synonymous, to see that they certainly overlap. They are both certainly, for a man who has any awareness of what's going on in his innards, not physically, but his other innards, knows that he does not, under any normal conditions, have control over the thought processes, nor are they ever calm and clear. In fact, if they accidentally are for more than several moments, a man becomes disturbed by it. Which I think is part of what pushed General Sarnoff to help invent television, or to make it available to the public. If indeed to say that this extraordinary state of enlightenment, liberation of the mind, is not something that is achieved and is a continuing condition after that. To say that while assuring that it is valid, then you're left with the fact that if you devoted the majority of your life, if you consider that the center of your life, the aim of your life was to reach such a state, then you're left with this. You've got just lots and lots, just lots, really a lot of time left to devote to the second part, that is the effort to achieve it. I mean, you got a lot of time. You got a lot of time before you achieve it the first time. Then you'll have no shortage of time between that time and the next time, the second time. Then before it comes back again, you will not be sitting around thinking, boy, I couldn't hardly get my breath. It's just one enlightenment after another. No. That's not really the way it operates. So you've got lots and lots of time to devote to the struggle, to the effort. There is, I will point out, it takes no effort to do this, but there is, might as well give it credit, you could say an alternative way in which to spend your time, and that is daydreaming about it. Yeah. But that was thrown in as a free alarm clock as a door prize for everyone. All right, so if anyone's had an interest in such as this, if anyone had even watched these programs for a while and tried to absorb it, then I got to tell you, either that, or if you had just read in the past something about the idea of groups of people somewhere, some mystical order, that their whole idea was to try and reach, to achieve a state of individual reunion with the Godhead, back to the fount of creation, to in some way reunite yourself to it. And that the method to do so was to never let your consciousness lose an awareness of creation or the Godhead, whatever. Now, if you had read that and you were the sort of person that was already wired up and born to travel, born with this kind of hunger, it does not seem that way, but I'm assuming that everyone has been long past having just read or thought about that one time. But if you kept reading about one time, that you keep repeating it, the fact is, to believe that you need additional information to reach the state by whatever name and term you may be using as your operational definition, to believe that you need additional information is not true. I know it appears to be otherwise. But let us say that a person with an indigenous interest in such as this, and they stumble around and they run across some book. It's the most common way. And they read about some past mystical effort that said that the point of people such as you, if you're reading it and find it of interest, that the purpose of a few people on the planet, their only interest was the liberation of the mind. Let's use that one. And you realize you read a little bit more. Either that one statement gets it, or you have to read through the book. You lay it aside and you come back a month later, you read it again. And it's like you never read it the first time. Then you read a third time. And by then, if not the first time, the liberation of the mind makes perfect sense to you. You have no question, and I just picked that one at random, out of the several major ones that I retold to start with. Let us say that that one just strikes you. The liberation of the mind. It requires no defense, no explanation. It strikes you as absolutely adequate. That right then, if you had your one wish in life, it would be to experience the liberation of the mind. Not that you could explain anything about what it meant, not that you could defend your choice, not that you could in any way try and offer a description to your best friend, even though you'll probably try it, as to why that you want to point to it and read it to somebody. But it's not necessary, finally, that somebody else agree to you. You read that, and it's like, well, until further notice, until my understanding improves, or until I find a better explanation, that, by God, is it. That's what I want. And in the early passion of youth, when I assume that you would have read such, a person will come to the conclusion, make their own personal decision that I will do anything. I will do anything to reach that state. And they mean that as sincerely as is possible. Mm-hmm. And the question soon becomes, though, is, all right, I've agreed that I will pay any price required to achieve that. And within a reasonable length of time, it becomes a new question about, well, who's going to tell me what the price is? Yeah. It's like you're staying out there in the plain of life somewhere up on a windswept cliff, and you're hollering, you turn out your pockets and you say, listen, that's what I want. Somebody out there, life has made somebody in the past describe it, they hit me. The liberation of the mind, here I am. I'm ready to pay. I'll jump off the cliff, maybe. I'll come close. I'll sure as hell do anything short of death right now. I'll do anything for it out there. What can I do? So it's somewhat off-putting, can even become sort of discouraging. Some people, in fact, get past discouraged and just become pissed and decided to appoint themselves gurus or forget about it or go back to drugs. But there you are, prepared to pay any price, that you have selected one, apparently, if not the other way around, but you have selected one, the liberation of the mind. And when I say sincerely, I'm not being sarcastic. That is as sincere. It is more sincere than most decisions an ordinary man can ever make, that you decide this is it. And your excitement increases. It's probably the most excitement you've ever had non-physically. And you think, I will pay the price. I will do anything to reach that state. If I could experience that, if I could experience that, I would do anything. And it's like you keep wandering around like, well, does anybody hear me? Does anybody hear me? Well, and you keep waiting for life or a teacher, some mystical teacher to show up and go, well, the time's right and they sent me here to... You keep waiting. You believe without any doubt. I mean, there is no other choice. That you believe. You say, I'll pay the price. What is the price? So it seems what is lacking is a piece of information. But if you read a book that described the liberation of the mind, then in the book, in the writing, if just one guy who knew what he was talking about, I'm assuming all this came from some source, actual, based on experience. We just have to go with that. There's not somebody simply rehashing and a cut and paste version of past writings, but that it was from the source of someone who achieved the liberation of the mind sufficient number of times over a lifetime that they could write with a kind of authority that only other people actually can discern, or they sense it. But if the man, or whoever it was that wrote it, the book, the writings in which you picked up the term, the liberation of the mind, somewhere in there, whether it was just a page or a whole tome, somewhere in there he gave some description, always, of the method, his method, the method he suggested. Let us say that whatever book it was that this person found, that they found the description first, the liberation of the mind, they decide this is it, there's no doubt, that is what I want, at any price. Then they continue to read it. If they don't get the first time, they finally realize that somewhere in there the guy's saying, it may not be hidden, but he's saying, all right, here is the most efficient way to go about it, which is to say this is the most efficient way he found to go about it, is to try and keep a part of your consciousness out of the hands of external events, which is sort of like another more elaborate way of saying attempt to stabilize consciousness or to clear the mind. But he is saying, well, here's the way, if you're going to experience this liberation of the mind, then what you've got to do is realize that your own consciousness is continually tied to what appears to be passing events. I said external, but it can appear to be internal, but the internal events are always based upon your reaction, the mind's reaction to some past external event. So that's what it always comes down to. But he says something to this effect. He may have a short term for it, such as you must stabilize consciousness. But let's say that he tries to elaborate a bit. And he says the method that I suggest is to try to realize that you can hold a piece of your consciousness, your mental awareness, you can hold a piece of it away from its natural, its continual interaction with passing events. Of course, as always, there's a trick in there, because if you can do that for any length of time, you already realize a lot more than I'm going to try to put into words. I mean, just to realize what's involved with that easily is worth 10 or 20 years worth of effort. Easily. Even though people could hear that and say, well, I got you. And it can still be 20 years before it has the full personal, individual impact on you that it deserves, or it reaches its full potential in you. But let us say that this person who just decides, shouldn't say selects, but just decides that the liberation of the mind is the aim. That is what is driving their life. That is what they are here for. That is what they are going to work for, and they will pay whatever price is possible. Then from that same source, they interpret his description of the way, or one way to go about it, the best way, is to realize first that you can hold a piece of your mental operation now, a piece of your mind, your unliberated mind. There's a piece of it that you can hold aside from its normal state of captivity, that is, its natural state of being tied to passing events, both internally and externally, appears. And let us say that finally, after you read it once, twice, 6 months, a year, that it finally strikes you that without any doubt, you can, again, it's not open to explanation, interpretation, you're not there to debate it, it just finally strikes you, yes. Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. It may be that you've tried it 12 times, 1,000 times since you first read about it, 10,000 times. But it may take 10,000 times, and it may only be once a day. It might be once a week. And then it might be 20 times a day for the next day. Then it might be 100 the next day. And then it might be 6 months before you do it again. But assuming that you continue with it, and you're the type of person I am referring to, then we'll assume that the day comes that it just strikes you, yeah. Yeah, in the same way that it struck you finally, if not initially, when you read the purpose of life for a few men is the liberation of the mind. Yeah. I mean, that's all you can say. Yeah. Turn the page. Yeah. All right. Then sooner or later, the method. Some method will strike you. That, even though, as I said, you may have been familiar with the method, the description, it can be a matter of, many months before it strikes you. Yeah. And I'm not going to try to explain much more of it. It's based on some experience. It's based on you fooling around with it, even mulling the idea of the liberation of the mind. Liberation of the mind, you keep thinking about that, and then you keep thinking about how he said that he went about it, about the attempt to hold a piece of the mind free. Just free. Not involved, not debating, not arguing with the captivity, not arguing and criticizing passing events, but realizing there's a piece of the mind, a small piece, just a piece, just enough that you can be aware of it, that right this moment you can keep free from what's going on, from everything else that your mind's normally doing. It finally, it may take thousands of times, but it finally strikes you with that same kind of certainty that, that does not bring on enlightenment. That does not bring on the awakening of the mind. All right, necessarily. So then a person thinks, all right, I believe I know what this is up to, and you may be even to the point of not being a fanatic or a fanatical defender of the goal being liberation of the mind. That is, you do not necessarily go around talking about it, or if you heard somebody use the term liberation of the mind, you heard two people talking. One of them said, I've heard of that. Isn't that a crock? You don't feel like defending it. You don't feel like saying, well, I beg your pardon, that's serious business. It's that you now have some certainty. You're not that concerned. You have no icons verbally to defend. That we'll assume you're to the point that you realize there could be a better description than this. That's just the best one. That's the one that hit me. Also, it will strike you that there could be another description of the effort. Because even after you reach the point of that particular method, that you've reached the stage, it does not, as I suggested, necessarily bring on an instant liberation of the mind. So you are not being unreasonable after some period of time after that, of having accepted reached these two stages of like over a description of what the aim is, the liberation of the mind, and then the method, the attempt to hold the smallest piece possible, a small piece of one's currently captive mind outside the grip of its affixation to passing events. And finally, that too hits you. Yes. You got those two yeses down. It seems like you have got the aim down. As I said, there are two things: the state itself, the description, and to realize that there's some method to achieve it. But the two yes eventually strike a man as being somehow lacking. That is, you still have not reached the state of the liberation of the mind. It's always potentially unprofitable to try and pick out specific times, years and months and all that. But just as many of you know from experience, your own, and you can fill it in. But after that those two kind of personal yes, you could say that the person then is more so than ever, more so than as when they started, irreversibly put on the quest, or at least they're on the track. It may be to the point that they could not now, without some sort of apparent extreme discomfort to themselves, ever abandon this completely. That's not to say that you can't wander off from it for a long, long time. But those really with the virus, they keep wandering back, and oftentimes, and there's much religious mystical literature publicly available wherein this is noted in various ways, They keep finding themselves wandering back, and they express, sometimes poetically and sometimes rather colloquially, bluntly, they express a kind of rhetorical musing that, you know, sometimes I wish I'd never heard of this. Or as they might say in Norway, it seems like I was finally convinced that I was to be a fisherman, and yet here I sit, and I can't sometimes fish or cut bait. All I can seem to do is bitch about the weather and the rocking of the boat. And I'd have been better off if I'd never even heard of this stuff. Poor old them. Poor old everybody. But you're to the point then, let us say, that a reasonable length of time has gone by and you still have not achieved it. More than ever, where does a man look? Or if he has to think, what is lacking? As it was in the beginning, when he thought, well, I'll pay the price. I'll pay the price. No, what's the price? What was lacking? Additional information. That is, what's the price? And then he concludes that the price is the continual remembering, the continual mental awareness, the continual holding of a piece of mental awareness that is not totally affixed to passing events. That seemed to be the price. You go, all right, yeah. And it finally strikes you, yeah. And everything that entails. That is, you accept it, yeah, that's the price. Yeah, that seems to me the proper price. Yeah, the price now makes sense. Now I see what it is. I understand indeed it is a price. It is something that cost you dearly to try and remember to do. So as best he can, this fictitious but sincere person, they go a not unreasonable length of time and they still have not achieved the liberation of the mind. What will they think then? What is the only reasonable thing to conclude sometime later on as to why you have not yet achieved liberation of the mind? What is lacking? To a reasonable person, there's only one thing going to come to mind. Additional instruction. Additional information. I want to tell you that that is not true. The first one, just the one I selected at random out of the several I gave, the attempt to keep one small piece of one's mental awareness out, away from, it's a fixation to passing events. Once you decided, if that was the one, once you decided, once it struck you, decided is not really proper, but you know what I mean. But once it struck you that yeah, and yeah. The cold truth is, there is no additional information or direction needed after that. And yet that can't be. That can't be, because any sincere person who would meet the general qualifications of the scenario, the life scenario I've drawn up thus far, you'd say, well, that can't be, because I am that kind of sincere person. I have devoted large segments, the biggest chunks of my life, outside probably of working and sleeping, at least I try to devote to this one way or the other. I'm always thinking about it, always worrying about it, reading about it, trying to write about it, trying to reflect upon it. There is no external objective reality to this one statement, but you already know this. Any of the descriptions, any of the methods, like the attempt to calm the mind, the attempt to focus consciousness, they do not exist out there as an objective reality. So just because a person just because it struck a person that, yeah, that's it, the calming of the mind. Let's do that since we're running out of time. That's easier to say than my long description. The calming of the mind. If that's the one that struck you, that the liberation of the mind, the way to go about it, the way to achieve that extraordinary state, that state in which all questions are answered, that everything you ever wanted to know is just right in front of your face. It is the experience. It's the experience without equal. And let us say that the method that you read about that finally strikes you is to calm the mind. To calm the mind. You work with years on it, and you still have not achieved the liberation of mind. So your only conclusion is not unreasonable, is I need some additional information. I thought that was it. It struck me as it to calm the mind, but something is missing. The passion of it. There is no other information needed. And information will not achieve liberation of the mind. Information will not awaken a man. Information will not bring on enlightenment. And yet you must start there. But what is missing? What is missing after we're assuming that a person understands that there is an aim to this that is extraordinary? It is extraordinary in the sense they don't know it, but I described in Newsime tonight. Extraordinary aims and extraordinary efforts are easily explained. They're efforts and achievements that can only be recognized by you. No one else realizes that what you're doing does you any good. I mean, just in case you want a description to play with, that's it. No other person outside yourself can in any way look at what you're doing. They just cannot look at what you're doing and realize any benefit that you're deriving. None. If you're really desperate and out of town and semi-catatonic and you can't remember, how can I tell? There's how you can tell. Once you have been struck that a method is after that, it's not a matter of additional information. It's a matter of the passion to do it. There is a dynamic at work that I've mentioned several times, but I'm going into more detail obviously now next time, having to do with the way life's arranged, that the passion to do something comes in a sense from one view, from a minority view, that the passion for life comes at the wrong end. It comes at the right end for the herd. It comes to the right end for man collectively, but it's for the benefit of life, the overall benefit of life, because the passion for life primarily comes out in men sexually to keep life going, and the passion is where it should be. You might say the passion for sex is when it should be. Is when men and women are in their prime, which is physically in your prime is somewhere this side of 22 or 23 years old, probably. And so that is where the passion for the benefit of life in general, that is where it peaks. But from a minority view, that is from a view not taking into account the overall health and benefit of life, which of course you don't have to. I mean, like by now I've got to point out to you that life's health is just hanging by a thread, just waiting to be sure that at least you consider it and you're concerned about it. I mean, that'll really help a lot, make the difference. It is from a minority view that the passion for life is at the wrong end. I was going to say, we've got to quit the tapes out and don't get the blues till next time, like you're going to age that much between now and next time. That's going to make all the difference in the world. Of course, you could think, well, it's possible. Yeah, it's possible. But try not to.